Ready to start, restart, or re-energize your vegan or plant-based practice? You're in the right place. My name's Michelle Olander, and this is Vedge Your Best. Episode 188, Fermenting, Making Food and Books, Avoiding Amazon, and Nourish, with author and teacher Terry Walters. Sometimes it feels easier to fill myself with information about nutrition and diet than it does to actually eat the foods that serve me and skip the ones that don't. That's one of the first sentences in Terry Walters' beautiful book, Nourish. And this week, Terry Walters is our guest. And I hesitate to call Nourish a cookbook, though it has over 200 recipes. It's also an extremely beautiful object and kind of a manifesto for creating food that does what it says on the cover, Nourish. Terry believes food can be a huge part of healing. And she's been teaching about nourishing plant-based foods for years, primarily gluten-free, but also with some sourdough bread making, which she calls gluten-reduced. But as you know, I think the guests here on Vedge Your Best all demonstrate a different way of advocating for vegan and plant-based choices. Terry says her goal is more than empowering people to make delicious food. Delicious food, she says, is just the result of inspiring and empowering them to make healthy choices. Nourish, the book's title, is all about just that. It's how we feed ourselves, how we nourish ourselves. Today we'll talk fermentation, nutrients and anti-nutrients. We'll talk co-op food markets, her thoughts on unrefined, unfiltered apple cider vinegar, and the process of making an absolutely beautiful book with recipes. Yes, recipes, but also gorgeous photos, visual artworks, and powerful writing, and choosing to work with an artisanal printer, not just go through Amazon. There's a lot in this conversation. I think you're going to love getting to know Terry Walters. And so let's not waste a minute more. Terry Walters, welcome to Vedge Your Best.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to feature your new book, Nourish, and to talk about what you do as a health coach, as a plant-based specialist and recipe developer, and every other aspect of what you do in this space. And you came to my attention because as we're recording this, we're coming right up on Rhode Island Veg Fest. And I am half the year in Rhode Island. And Rhode Island Veg Fest, I think, it's very close to my heart. And so it's like, how did I not know Terry Walters? So Terry, tell everybody about yourself.
Well, that's so nice of you to say. I'm so excited about the Veg Fest this weekend because I've actually never been. So I'm pretty thrilled, and it looks like it's going to be a really great time. I've actually been in this space for 24 years and teaching all plant-based, primarily gluten-free, although I do in the last decade or so have started teaching sourdough bread making. So I'll call that gluten reduced. But really, my goal is not to empower people to make delicious food. That's just the result of inspiring, empowering them to make healthy choices. And I've just long felt that you can't make a healthy choice unless you know you're making a choice in the first place. And so in the beginning, my classes were, I was kind of beating to my own drum, and probably 9 out of 10 people thought I was a little bit crazy. You're eating what? And but 1 out of 10 said, geez, I'm kind of curious about that. And they saw me healing myself and my children and using food to do that, and asked me to teach them. So I started teaching cooking classes. taking people to the grocery store and showing them where to find all these unusual ingredients. And back then, sometimes we had to take field trips out of the state just to get organic quinoa, or a variety of legumes. And now my local conventional grocery store carries, organic quinoa in 3 colors and varieties. So the change has been significant. Then we were learning about the different foods. Now there's so much more to be aware of because, well, first of all, I'm of that wonderful age where my body is going through a lot of change, but our food system has changed so much. So now, in order to make a healthy choice, our food system is not transparent. So there's a lot to know, because what you see is not always what you get. So my focus is on what is the food? How can we source it? How do we know what we're getting? And how do we listen to our bodies to know what our unique constitutions need in order to thrive?
Well, Terry, the largest number of the listeners to this podcast are women in what is euphemistically called midlife or a certain age or over 40. What are some things that you think women in that age group need to be a little more aware of in terms of the foods that we eat and the choices that we make that maybe when we were 20 or 30, we kind of didn't pay attention to so much?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first thing that I really try to emphasize is that we're in it together. There's a lot to be learned from each other. And one of the things I love about teaching cooking classes is having a kitchen full of women talking, sharing, supporting each other, learning from each other, sharing their wisdom. And that to me is equally as important as what we're bringing and putting in our bodies. So that's the first thing. And I think, being in that group, you arrive here, and at least my generation, I feel we arrive here, but there wasn't a lot of conversation about it. And so I want there to be a lot of conversation. I want it to be that conversation to be normalized. I want my children to know what the different stages are like, what they can expect, and that they can love their bodies throughout the whole thing and navigate with grace. So that's super important to me. I think for women in particular, but for everybody, just because of the changes of our food system, probably the top thing that's missing is caring for our microbiome. And we have many microbiomes in the body, your mouth, your gut, your nose, but our food system does not have the living foods to support those microbiomes. We don't have the awareness of the prebiotics that feed the healthy bacteria. So I think the prebiotic and probiotic foods are super important. And in Nourish, I actually dedicated a whole section to that, even though, yes, I still think eating in balance with the season is important and minimally processed foods for maximum nutrition. But before all of it, we really need to attend to our gut. And that balance actually supports digestion. It supports our emotional and intellectual well-being, our moods, our behaviors. So it's our immune system. So I think it's super, super important.
And so prebiotics, for my listeners, are the things that the gut microbiota feed on, right? The bacteria.
Right. So we have more bacteria in our gut than we have cells.
Oh.
Okay. And we don't make that good, healthy bacteria on our own. We have to bring it in. That's the probiotic. But the probiotic's not going to stick around unless we feed it all those good microbiota, right? We need to feed them, and that's the prebiotics. So the probiotics are the bacteria and the prebiotics feed the bacteria. And we need both, even though probiotics are much sexier and that's what you hear, that's what's going to come up when everybody listens to this. That's going to be the next ad on their Facebook page, right? Because they've just been listening to us talk about it. And prebiotics aren't sexy, but they're really easy, right? Like, eat some onions, some garlics, a banana, have a prune each day. Like, these are foods that really, some psyllium, these help feed and maintain that good probiotic balance.
And so one of the things I've heard is that we want to be eating, the standard American diet has a lot of us eating 5 to 7 to 10
products or food products over and over on repeat. And I know that when I went plant-based, when I went vegan, I mean, I've never eaten so many different foods at a single meal. As you know, it's not, though I know there are some people out there who survive on Diet Coke and French fries. I have a lot of different foods on my plate. And that's one of the things I show on my Instagram is when I eat, there's a lot of food there. And I think that's something that people don't realize how fun they're going to find that when they've transitioned from more of a standard American diet to a clean, sometimes it's called, or a plant-based plate full of food. I know that you have classes that you teach. One of the ones I'm intrigued by is fermented foods. How do fermented foods work in your gut microbiome?
Well, I want to go back for a second because I had never heard that most people eat 5 to 10 different foods in a day, and that's about it. Because one of the things that I teach, and one of the things that I have found is that I'll mention an ingredient and people will say, I've never seen that. But we are so conditioned to go into the grocery store with the mindset of, I'm going to get in and get out, right? And we get what we know we're looking for, what we know how to use. And the dandelion greens, the mustard greens, the watercress, they've all been right there all along, right next to the lettuce or the broccoli that you've been buying for years. So I think one of the best things we can do, like I always say, you can change your entire life with one breath. And it's just one strategic breath. Instead of like flying into the grocery store, just stand on the threshold of the store for one deep breath and breathe in and exhale and breathe in that intention of, I'm going to make mindful choices. I'm going to look at what's here. And maybe you bring home something that you've never brought home before, and experiment with it. I actually handwrite my index so that you can do just that. I prefer people use my books from the back to the front. See what you have, get something unusual at a farmer's market or a farm stand, bring it home, look in the back. Fennel, what do I do with that? Here are 10 recipes, and off you go. And now you're trying something new. So even if you just commit to trying one new recipe or one new food per week, if you liked only half of them at the end of the year, you would have had 26 new foods that you've added to your diet, which is a lot, especially given that you just said most people eat 5 to 10 different packaged foods a day. So I think that's really cool. I think fermented foods it's an art form that we've lost, and it preserves the harvest. It grows healthy bacteria. So you can take a probiotic, and the standard probiotic might have 2 or 3 different strains of bacteria, and maybe it has a billion count of each one. Or you can eat fermented foods. And now let's just say it's sauerkraut, right? And maybe there are 3 or 4 different strains of bacteria naturally on the cabbage and the salt and the water that we put in to make that sauerkraut. But as it ferments, it grows more bacteria, beneficial bacteria. And so by the time you're eating that sauerkraut 2, 3 weeks or months later, depending on how long you ferment it, there could be 50, 100, or 1,000 different strains of bacteria, which is much more like what the profile is in your gut than that high potency probiotic that's manufactured with 2 or 3 strains of bacteria.
Mm. So, my mom was a nurse, and I always laugh that we could have done surgery on any surface in my house growing up. My mom was extremely diligent. And I remember at some point talking to her before she died, we were laughing about something, and I was vegan then, and I was eating all these things. And she was like, something about fermented foods. And she said, they're going to have to give it another name, beneficial bacteria. She goes, I've been fighting bacteria for 50 years. There's no way I'm going to purposely eat a bunch of it.
It's awesome. Yeah, except that it's so good for us and it is bacteria. And when you understand the microbiome and that we need that bacteria and we're not getting it from any other foods or making it ourselves, it starts to make sense. But it is a strange concept to cultivate the bacteria that's on food. Like we're literally rotting food and it's healthier, like right. And so I get it. I think I fermented foods for, I don't know, 6 months before I got up the nerve to actually try eating it. So I understand it. There's a bit of a learning curve there. But I mean, think about before there was refrigeration, people, they would grow the cabbage, let's just say, and they'd bring it in all at one time at the end of the harvest and they'd chop it up and they'd put it in a huge keg in the basement and they'd sprinkle salt on it and then they'd tamp it down and put another layer of kraut and then a cabbage and then more salt and tamp it down and they'd fill that huge keg, cover it up and leave it in the basement. And then they'd have a little crock on their counter and they'd go down and fill that crock and that's what they'd eat. And when it was empty, they'd go down and refill. So that first batch of sauerkraut would be really fresh and refreshing and crispy. And the longer it sat and the further into the season it went, it would get more sour and a little softer and have more probiotics, which is great since in the colder months, that's what we need. So to balance all of those carbs that we tend to crave, hint, hint. So yes, it's fascinating. And there's so many things you can ferment almost anything. And we use fermentation for so many different things. We just don't think about it, right? We ferment our grapes to make wine. We ferment our dairy to make cheese. Now, we don't, like I ferment my wheat to make a sourdough starter to rise my bread. And then I ferment the bread. And so I'm using that good bacteria. But then, of course, I take the bread and put it in a 500-degree oven. So nothing's going to live through that. But I've already made a healthier bread just by allowing that wheat to ferment for 12, 24, 36 hours.
So you had said earlier that your recipes are basically known for being gluten-free also free of animal products. But you mentioned the sourdough breads as being gluten reduced. And is that gluten reduction because of the fermentation that you
fermentation is this wonderful process. And we think all we're doing is growing good bacteria, but actually it does a lot. It can neutralize anti-nutrients. It can increase nutritional value. So if there are, 4 or 5 different vitamins in a food, when it goes into the fermentation, there might be, a dozen or 2 dozen different vitamins and minerals. So it actually does grow in nutrition or increase nutrition in that way. It certainly creates for very big flavors. So no one's ever said that fermented foods are subtle. And in the case of bread, the fermentation actually eats the gluten. So the wheat itself doesn't have the gluten in it, but the second it touches water, it starts forming it. And then we are actually we need it to develop the gluten, and the gluten is the protein, the strands that hold the bread together. And then once we've developed the gluten, we let the bread ferment, and the fermentation eats the protein and leaves the structure. So if we let the bread ferment for a very long time, it would just return to starter. But you can let the bread ferment for 24, 36 hours and have a bread that's much easier to digest and assimilate than a conventional yeast-risen bread.
So now why should some of us consider reducing our gluten intake or completely avoiding gluten? Is it a personal choice with you, or a health choice, or is it something you think other people should consider trying?
Well, I think it's all personal choice, but it should be. I hate that word. I can't believe I just said it. I would like to think, not should, I would like to think that we're making our choices based on knowing all of the facts. And the facts include that the way we grow wheat in this country has changed very dramatically. We now grow it and genetically modify it to have way more gluten protein than the wheat that you and I had as kids, and it can be very difficult to digest. It can create a lot of inflammation. Um, and so I think for people who are having conditions or symptoms of inflammation, it's a great place to start is to cut out the gluten. Absolutely. Um, but it might not be the only thing, and it might be working for you, but you have to, it's our diets and our lifestyles are a big picture. So you can't hyper focus on one thing and ignore everything else. Dairy can be inflammatory, animal protein can be inflammatory, and then there's that little thing called sugar, and so that's a big culprit for a lot of conditions. And so I always think just the more honest we are with ourselves, the better choices we can make. And you might not know what that even means. So I don't think that journaling is the best way to keep a healthy relationship with food if we do it in the long term, but in the short term, to be able to see what we're eating and how we're feeling um, is a great way to start identifying, geez, I start to crash in the middle of the day. So maybe I don't have great nutrition in the first part of the day, or whatever the case might be. I don't sleep well at night and I wake up exhausted. Maybe I'm eating too late in the day. There could be a bazillion reasons, as many as there are individuals. So, but knowing what you're choosing from and understanding, I think is the first step.
So two questions about that. When you do make sourdough bread, when you do use wheat, how do you try to source your wheat so that you are avoiding some of the wheats that you think are problematic, these monocultures and these commercially highly processed, highly fertilized and grown in soil that's been very depleted? How do you avoid that sort of thing?
Can I take that to food in general? Because
Please.
I think it's the same answer. And it's funny that we're talking about bread so much. We must be having cravings. um, because I think it's just important to know where your food comes from in general and how it's grown and what's used in the soil. And to that, not everybody can grow their own food. I take a layman's stab at it every year, and I have some successes in my little backyard garden, enough to keep me trying again the year after. But there are local farms. If I can't get to a local farm and I'm at a grocery store, I want to see the information. If I can't find the information right there, I'll ask somebody. And asking is about the greatest way to change our food system, because I just remember I used to go into my local conventional grocery store when my kids were really little, and I wanted apple juice. And they only had apple juice in a plastic container. And so I went in and I said, how could I get organic apple juice in a glass bottle? And they said, oh, we can't do that. It's too expensive to ship and we get too much breakage. And you end up paying for that. And I said, okay. Thank you very much. And then the next time I'd walk in, I'd say, hey, how can I get organic apple juice in a glass bottle? To the point where, they'd see me coming and be like, oh, it's that lady again. But now there are many options for organic apple juice in glass bottles in my grocery store. And I want people to understand grocery stores want to serve us. They serve their communities that they're in. That's their goal. And they can't do that unless they know what you're looking for. So use your voice, because things aren't going to change in the way we want them to from the top down nearly as quickly as they will from the bottom up. So ask. And I don't always eat organic. But when I don't eat organic, I know where it comes from. Like I know the farms that can't afford the organic certification, but I know that they're growing with respect to the soil and the plants, and they're not using any additional fertilizers, genetically modified anything, Roundup, anything. So, I feel really good about that, but I can't make that choice unless I know what I'm looking for. You and I connected about that, a grocery store in Massachusetts that we both adore. And one of the things I love is that when I go into that produce section, at least 50% of it is from the valley where the store is, and it says the name of the farm. And I love that. Even if I don't have the answer right there, I can go home and look up the farm and now, oh, I want to support them. And so that makes me feel really good. And it feels like it's much more sustainable for our whole system. And that's the kind of food system I want to grow.
Well, let's give a shout out to River Valley Co-op, because it is a wonderful co-op. My husband is a member. He's the one that does most. He's my forager, and his office, our office, but the one he goes into is in Northampton, Massachusetts. And I have to say, my husband and I met in Northampton, and we've lived there or near it for a long, long time. And the Valley, as it's called by many people, the Pioneer Valley, is an area where we had organic behaving farms for years and years and years. We've had a marvelous food culture in the Valley. And when we would leave, we would go, even in New York or, very, very sophisticated areas, they would not have the same local and committed farmers that we've had in that part of Massachusetts.
Yeah, I feel really lucky to be almost local.
Yeah, well, you're in Connecticut.
I'm a committed member. I make the drive once every 6 weeks or so, but also like there are co-ops all over the country,
Yeah.
and they learn and share and grow together and support each other. And it's a really great system. I know, like, for instance, that the River Valley Co-op in Northampton has just worked really closely over the last many years, actually, to help open a co-op in Dorchester, Massachusetts. So I'm super pumped to hear that the co-ops are growing. And I love, a lot of people think that eating vegetables, eating plants is one, inconvenient, and two, more expensive. And I find that convenience is just a matter of knowing what you're doing. Like, I can make steel cut oats, which most people think take about an hour to make. I can put them in a pot at night, bring the water to a boil, cover it, turn it off, and go to bed. And in the morning, they're perfect. And all I did was put them in the pot. It took me about 60 seconds. So convenience is just perception. And I try and put a lot of tips like that in my books so that people can make these recipes really fit their lifestyle instead of trying to fit themselves to the recipes.
Terry, that is such a good point, because people who are new to that kind of a lifestyle are thinking, do you even get me? I'm running from the second I get up in the morning. I'm working, I'm paying bills. I've got kids, I've got elders to take care of. I've got a community. So I can't learn how to do the oats and the sourdough and the fermentation and the
I
all of
totally
it.
get it. I
And
totally
so
get it.
we have to remind them to start with one thing, right? Maybe it's the oats.
I was teaching a knife skills class many years ago. And, I told everyone, bring a Tupperware container so you can take home your whatever you chop up. And I had all the produce here, and we chopped onions and garlic and some daikon and carrots, and we chiffonaded collard greens. We made a mess of vegetables chopped up. And I said, let's just do something with these. So I took out a big Dutch oven and I drizzled a little oil on the bottom, and we put the onion and the garlic in first, and then we just literally dumped the rest of the vegetables into this pot. And I went into my pantry and I took out a little bit of a can of coconut milk and put it in, and a little water. Didn't even use stock, just water, and a couple tablespoons of curry powder, and we let it simmer for about 15 minutes, and it was delicious. It is absolutely, we broke every rule on how to make curry, but we used whatever we had, and it took 15 minutes. And something like that, you can make that last for 2 or 3 meals, which was just so it can be really easy. And then the other thing, cost, and what I love about co-ops is that there's no forced waste. You're not buying, your vegetables in a plastic container that might be a larger quantity than what you really want or are ever going to use. You're buying exactly what you need. And to be able to buy all your nuts, seeds, legumes, grains, flours, oils, any of it herbs, spices in bulk is such a savings. We're not paying for the packaging. We're not paying for the marketing that that goes on that packaging, right? We're not throwing away. You can bring your own bags, your own containers. So it becomes a savings for us, for the environment. It's just a win-win.
One other thing the co-ops do, and then we can move on to another subject, but the co-ops do work very closely with the local farms, and they help not remind, but they make sure that they know there is a market. So many times an independent grower, independent farms, if they have to try to market their things to a large supermarket company, they're kind of pushed because they can't produce as much as Stop and Shop maybe needs. Even though I think Stop and Shop tries to buy from local people, still the local co-ops are really committed to making sure that the farms that are there are getting are getting paid for their crops and that there's a market for their crops.
Also, their crops end up they go from the farm into the back door, or sometimes the front door, and onto the shelf. And that's not always the case. I used to be on the board of a local urban farm, and in the day we would drive up to the front of Fresh Fields or whatever the store was at the time and deliver our beautiful tomatoes right off the vine. And then the store got bought out, and then everything got bigger, and then all of a sudden all of our produce had to go to a distribution center in a totally different part of the state, and by the time it got on the shelf it was 4 or 5 days later. And that doesn't really represent the farmer well. It doesn't show off the produce. You're not getting the best, freshest produce, and so it doesn't work for anybody.
Yeah, no, it is. If somebody has the option to look in their Google a food co-op near them, that is a great idea. I think there actually is a find a co-op near you type of clearinghouse, and I'm going to look for that before I publish this. Yeah. So now I'm going to talk about some of the recipes because your newest book, and I think this is number 4, right? Right, Terry? Mm-hmm. Number 4. Number 4 is called Nourish, which is gorgeous, and I have it in front of me. And I have the other ones that you wrote before, which were Clean Start, Clean Food, and what's the other one?
Eat Clean, Live Well.
Okay.
Live Well. Yep.
Eat Clean, Live Well. So this one, I don't know what was in the other ones. I haven't seen them yet. They are all available on your site. You have self-published, which is a whole nother category of conversation we should have. But Nourish is gorgeous. It's really beautiful. Who took the photographs first? I want to make sure that whoever did that gets credit.
Well, let me just go back and correct. They're not all available. So if you can find Clean Food, Clean Start, Eat Clean, Live Well online, snap it up because even I can't get them.
Oh.
So they're either out of print or sold out, and they are not self-published. They were formally published. So Nourish is the newest book, and it is self-published, and the photography is by Julie Bidwell. She's a photographer local to she's in central Connecticut, and she did the photography for Nourish and as well as Eat Clean Live Well and a lot of my work. I love working with her. She's an amazing photographer, not just of food. And this book, Nourish, also features, as you now know, original artwork. So the cover and the season dividers are done by 2 twin sisters, actually, out of New Paltz, New York, Sarah and Megan Snow of Trio Design. And so they did just an incredible job. And
it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And the poetry that's included.
Thank you.
Is yours.
It is.
That's it's a really gorgeous book. So it's a feast for the senses on every aspect. I really love it. And it's opened right now. The one I'm looking at is whole roasted Romanesco with spicy dill drizzle. This had me at right from the beginning when I looked at it. It's in a cast iron pan, which I think I understand is one of your must-haves in your repertoire. Yes. And it's the Romanesco, which is that it's not cauliflower, it's not broccoli.
it looks like spiky broccoli.
Yeah.
It has like Tourette's on it. It's cool.
And with beans, white beans and dill. I mean, it's just got me at every ingredient. And I'm wondering if you could tell me, like, what goes into a Nourish recipe? You've done many recipes. In this book, what was your kind of theme for you?
Well, my theme is always eating in balance with my environment. So that's why all of my books are seasonal. But this book is a little different than the others because my previous books felt like I used to write recipes, but now I write meals. So I really, I wanted people to get in and get out one effort, and here's a balanced, complete meal. And I didn't want them scratching their heads. What am I serving this with? Right. And so, that's why within each season you won't see here grain dishes, here legume dishes. You'll see here are small plates, here are large plates, and they stand alone. They're complete. They're satisfying. They feature a rainbow of color and all the tastes, so they're super balanced. And so like that recipe with the Romanesco. Well, first of all, we're in winter. I want something warming, and so having that beautiful Romanesco or fall, you can get them in fall too. And like, what do you do with it? And one of my favorite things I always tell people is like, don't try and figure out what to do with it. Just shove it in the oven. Like if you don't know what to do, if you have squash and it's going bad on your counter, put the whole thing on a baking sheet and put it in the oven. You'll figure out what to do with it after. So it's kind of where I came from with the Romanesco. I'm like, let's just see what happens when you roast it whole, because who knows how to cut this thing, right? And so that was great. And I thought, like, once I tasted it, I thought, okay, what are the flavors I wanted? And so, like all good recipes, from October to March, they start by sauteing some onion and garlic or shallots and similar. And I always want to add something sweet. So like the prune, there's some chopped up prunes in there. So we're getting some good prebiotics, but also natural sweet and sweet's important. It's one of the tastes. So we have to get it nutritionally so we don't crave it non-nutritionally. And I'm looking at the color profile, and I needed protein so that we're sustainable. And the juxtaposition of the like slightly crunchy, hardy Romanesque when you cut it to serve it with the giganta beans, which are these soft, luscious, rich, kind of tangy beans, is really wonderful. And then you top the whole thing with like a little bit of a spicy aioli sauce with dill, and you're like, mind blown.
It looks fantastic, and I absolutely want to make that. That's on my list to make almost right away.
It's funny because there are some recipes in the book like that I think this is like an impressive whole meal, but it's not what I would eat. I might make it to serve to people, but like it's not what I'm eating every day, because I don't usually go to that much effort, to be perfectly honest with you.
Well, tell me what's an everyday type of meal that might be in Nourish.
I mean, I eat everything in the book. So like it might be one of the Buddha bowls, or like in the back, you'll see there's a whole section on dressings and dips, because to me, like you can make anything delicious if you have a kick-ass dressing. And so there are many of them, and I don't want them to get stuck in one recipe. Like there's a great carrot ginger dressing. There's a great roasted red pepper za'atar dressing with a little tahini in it. And they're in particular recipes, but they go with so many different things. And I like to, cook once and eat several times. So I might make one of the roasted vegetable dishes or the casserole dishes or the soup, or make the roasted vegetables and then turn them into one of the soups. So I do a lot of upcycling, but I mean, I could open the book. Lentil stew with roasted roots and cacao, cauliflower and celery root soup with sweet paprika. Actually, we've been eating that all week. And I brought this to a corporate program I was doing, and they were like, cauliflower and celery root? Really? You're making a soup out of that? Like, everyone thought it was going to be really boring. And it wasn't. It was simple, but it wasn't boring. And the flavors were so delicious with the sweet paprika and a little bit of dissolved tahini or cashew butter, whichever you prefer, to give it like this rich depth that maybe dairy might give to a cream soup. It was so good. People were blown away. So it doesn't take expensive or extravagant um, items like a Romanesque that's a little obscure
Mm.
to make really delicious, hearty, satisfying, nourishing food.
You know, that soup sounds like it would be great with the beet chips recipe that's in there that you said you made by accident.
I did. I was roasting vegetables. I used my mandolin and sliced the beets really thin and they burned. And I'm like, oh, these are delicious. I do have a sweet tooth for potato chips, so they hit me in just that perfect way. And I also people will probably notice, I use a lot of za'atar, so it's one of my favorite season blends. That some herbs de Provence, either one. But the beet chips are so easy, and you just slice, 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 and stick them in the oven, and in 10, 15 minutes they're done. Delicious,
Yeah,
delicious.
that crunch with that kind of unctuousness of a soup like that, it sounds fantastic. I'm starving. I haven't had lunch yet,
I'm
Terry. This is
sorry.
I'm going to look at the other ones. I wanted to. Oh, you talk about any. I love this. You have a recipe. You call it any grain salad,
Mm.
and that's kind of that. I think that's something you're kind of talking about. That it's really not hard. We can make. That's something anybody with just a little bit of not even practice, but just to do it twice,
Mhm.
it will be unconscious for you. Tell me something about an any grain salad that we could all try to incorporate.
Well, there are a couple of recipes in the book that are like that. There's like a no recipe energy bar and the any grain salad. And the whole idea is that there are components that make things work. And as long as you have all your bases covered, you can really play around and have some fun and make each recipe your own. So, in the warmer weather, you might want to use quinoa. In the winter, you might want to use wild rice. In the warmer weather, you might want to grate up some carrot or have some raw red onion. And in the winter, you might want to roast sweet potatoes or squash to add in with that. Any season, maybe you want to throw in some nuts and seeds, right? And then how do we dress it? Like we'll also hear some components and things that you could put in your dressing. And the most easy is maybe you just use a little olive oil and umi plum vinegar, or maybe you're making a more elaborate vinaigrette. Um, but I had a doctor when I first started eating like this, and I knew I had to change the way I eat just for my own health. He said to me, um, make some brown rice, chop up some vegetables, and then use your favorite salad dressing. And it was great advice. It really was. I can't say that I had a lot of success early on, but I ate it anyway. It wasn't bad, but it didn't make my mouth water thinking about what I was about to eat. But when you look at it and you think, I mean, I've done this for you with the recipes, so you don't have to be thinking this. But when I'm making recipes, I'm thinking, do I have all the tastes covered? And that doesn't mean equal amounts, it just means representation and balance. So, like, I use this example quite a bit. If you're making an apple squash soup, most people like an apple squash soup. Its takeaway taste is sweet. Squash is sweet, apples are sweet, onions are sweet when you saute them, and you might add maybe apple cider or a little bit of ginger or some coconut milk, like sweet, 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 sweet. And you'll have a solid soup. But if you want that soup to really knock your socks off, you have to add some of the other tastes. And that might mean a pinch of salt, a dash of cayenne, and I'm not talking spicy, I mean just a dash to give it depth, and maybe like a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar, right?
Mm.
And now you've added bitter, salty, pungent, um, and sour, right? So to go along with your sweet, now you have all the tastes in balance, not equal, but in balance. And that makes a huge difference. And I think about that a lot with all of my recipes.
I think that that's kind of a master class. If you go through your recipes in Nourish, you're going to see that kind of attention that you have paid to those different ingredients. Tell me something. I know you're a big believer in apple cider vinegar. Why should we all have some apple cider vinegar?
Oh, nice way to go full circle. Yeah, I mean, if you did nothing else for your health and maybe put a half a teaspoon of raw apples, unfiltered apple cider vinegar in water and started your day with that, that's that gives you your probiotics. It's a nice cleanse. It's great for your gallbladder. It's great for your liver. So, the more you can support your gut health, the more you're going to get out of everything that you're already eating.
Mm.
So it kills the bacteria that cause sore throats. Like it can help get rid of, help you if you have cramps. Like it's a great, whatever your grandmother said is true. So everybody always wants a quick fix, and there is no such thing as a quick fix, but there are things that we can bring in, and whether they're sustainable for you or not, but you can try them and see.
Yeah,
And
we can incorporate some of these things in and see what works well and what doesn't. And sometimes it's just not the right season. It's not the right like season in our life in terms of our attention span. And but we could. But it sounds like a little bit of apple cider vinegar. Most of us could figure that one out.
I think so. Yeah. And you know what? And if you get sick of it, then switch to lemon, and do that instead. And that's super alkalinizing also, in a great way to cleanse and support. So, the more tools we have in our toolbox, the better health we can achieve.
Now, I want to just touch on the concept of self-publishing because as you told me, Nourish is self-published and it's only available currently through your website, which is terrywalters.net. We'll have all of that in the show notes of the episode. But if you are expecting a book that's self-published to be very simple or pamphlet style, this is a very, very beautiful book. And I'm wondering what was the process to do such an elaborate book? Really, you've got the beautiful photographs, you've got the recipes, which are extensive, your writing, your poetry, the design. It's not what I think most people consider to be a self-published book.
Well, it very much is, and self-published. My team did everything, and I think the emphasis there is on team. I mean, I write the recipes, but I don't do the graphic design, and I just work with amazing, amazing people, and have from the very start. Andrew Brown and Kurt McKenzie in Chicago are my really dear friends, and they've been with me through every book. So. And so I think that's brought consistency to all of my books. So when you pick it up, if you're familiar with my other books, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, that's a Terry Walters book. It's really important to me that the recipes are easy to read, easy to follow. I mean, ideally, I'd like you to make it once, and then the next time, all you have to do is look down the ingredient list and go boom, 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 and you're done, and you don't even need the instructions. But there were a few things on my mind when I made this book, and I decided to self-publish it. The first is this O binding that allows the book to lie flat, which I think is a dream come true. Like, I make books for cooks in their kitchen, not to sit on a shelf. And so the fact that it just lies flat, that it's so easy to use in that way, was really, really important to me. It is more expensive to put a book together like this. It's of course more expensive to ship it because it's not a book you can just throw across the room and it'll be fine. So it has to go in a box, but it was worth it. The other thing is I really wanted to put the book out into the world using the same value system that I talk about in the book. And so it felt a little bit like a privilege to be able to do that at this point in my career and show other people that that's possible. I printed at this wonderful veteran-owned print shop, AM Lithography in Chicopee, Massachusetts, 45 minutes from my home. It was a huge project for them. And I thought to myself, like, why shouldn't we be giving our huge projects to the people in our own community? So it was awesome to work with them. And when you're printing locally and you know the printer and everybody that works there, and you see it go through the press, and you see things like, when we printed the cover, there was extra paper. So I think I sent you the bookmarks. Like, instead of having them trim it and pitch it, we made bookmarks so there wouldn't be any waste. So I tell people that when they're using my books, they can be assured that there's intention behind every ingredient and every step. And if they want to know it, the information is usually somewhere in the book for them to know it, but you don't have to. You can just make the recipes and benefit from it. And so I'd say the same thing about how we made this book as well, that we used all local people, printing. It's non-Amazon intentionally. And while I will say I am tired, I also, people buy from the website or I see them at events. And it has been such a gift to be traveling all over and hand people who you know are going to love your work the book. And that gives back to me. So it nourishes in both directions.
Well, I'm so glad we didn't skim over that, because I think that's just a really beautiful parallel to the work you're doing. This is artisanal. It's an artisanal book. It's an organic book in many, many ways. And I'm really glad that I hope that the listeners will take a look at it on your website. There are some, you have recipes on your website already. You have some plant-based and gluten-free recipes, and for sweets too. So if somebody's thinking, where did my dessert choices go now that I'm plant-based and gluten-free, there's a lemon poppy seed bundt cake, I think it is, on your website. And there are some crisps and tarts. So I think nobody has to do without.
No, there are, I call them desserts, but there are, sweets, I'll say, in every season. And, I don't call them desserts in the book. They're sweets for every occasion because I don't use refined sugars. I use all gluten-free flours. So they're high in protein and fat, teff and amaranth flour and quinoa flour, things like that. And, the highest sucrose sugar that I use is maple syrup, but very often it might be a grated apple or pear instead. So they're really low in sugar. And so, you can have them for breakfast and be energized and fueled with them, or you can have them as a snack or a dessert. So plenty of quote unquote sweets.
There's nothing that we're not going to be craving anything. We're not doing without anything with this sort of cooking, thanks to people like you bringing that kind of education to us.
Well, thank you. That's important to me because when I wrote Clean Food, it was always about eating less processed to get more nutrition, like just doing the best that we can. And it became very trendy that, clean food as a lifestyle, eating clean and clean food, which was never the intention, but it really got misconstrued and got associated with a lot of deprivation and rigidity. And it never was about that. So, yeah, you won't find judgment in my work here, and you won't find deprivation. You'll just find lots of really delicious ways to nourish yourself.
Terry Walters, thank you so much for being on Vedge Your Best. We're going to have all the different ways people can support your work and find out where you're going to be. You do corporate retreats and classes and wellness events. You will do some appearances, and you teach classes online. Is that the last, like the knife skills class? Is that online or is that in person?
I teach everything simultaneously, in person and online. So you can have 6 people in the kitchen with me here in Central Connecticut. And you might have someone taking the class and cooking along with us from Australia. So, which we did in the last class, which is what made me think.
Wow. You're worth getting up in the middle of the night for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry Walters.
Thanks, Michelle.
So what did you think of Terry? You can immediately follow Terry Walters at terrywalters.net, terrywalters.net, and on Instagram at Terry Walters Cooks, and on Facebook at Clean Food. How did she get that one? Facebook, Clean Food. And if you go to her events page on terrywalters.net, at the top it will give you one of the choices is events. There you'll see Terry's upcoming calendar of classes and workshops. And if you look at it this month, it includes in-person and virtual classes about fermentation, sourdough breads, and light and easy cooking. So definitely make it part of your perusal of her site to hit the events page and see if there's something you'd like to learn that she loves to teach. And if, like so many of us, you're heading into spring feeling ready to clean up some of your nutrition and to inject some new foundational plant-rich recipes into your week, I cannot think of a more beautiful book to grab right now or to give as a spring gift. Nourish. Nourish. Nourish by Terry Walters, and it's available through her website, terrywalters.net. And of course, the links will be in the show notes. Okay, my Veg Your Bestie. So many ways to veg your best in this life and advocate for something that will nourish you and your family and your community. And enjoy the spring. I'll see you next week.
Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.